Well, good evening. I certainly have a great opportunity for some more Bible study tonight. I know that maybe the last few classes have been a little different than what we would normally do. Looking forward to getting into the book of Romans at the beginning of the year in January. I don't know how long it's supposed to take you to get through the book of Romans. Larry Sullivan, if you're watching, I had a friend of mine did, I think it was 88 lessons through the book of Romans. I don't foresee me taking that long. I don't know. I hope not. It kind of depends on if I teach it as a class or if I just get up and preach it. I think I can get through it faster if I just get up and preach it, but I like to have the opportunity to do some feedback and discussion and things like that too. So still not sure exactly how I'm going to do it. I know I've mentioned that I haven't read, let me say this right. I have not taught Romans in a class ever. So I'm repenting of that, and hopefully God will forgive me. That's 31 years of preaching that I've neglected it, so it's time I get into it. But tonight we're going to continue. Actually, we're going to finish out the discussion we've been having on methods of Bible study, ways that we might study the Bible. And I've got three tonight that I want to talk about, and probably my favorite three, probably the three we're most familiar with. And the first one is the idea of what we sometimes simply refer to as a theological method of study. Now, this is very similar. We talked about, I believe it was last week, a topical style where we just find a topic and we go through the Bible and look at all the verses that talk about that topic. In fact, we were driving up here tonight for class, and the idea of Jericho as a city came up, and I was thinking of all the times that Jericho is mentioned in the Bible, and what we normally think of Joshua. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, right? So we normally think of Joshua, but Zacchaeus was from Jericho, and I believe they were walking out of the city of Bartimaeus in Jericho. So you might take a topic like Jericho, or you might take a topic like blindness, and things like that. And a good reference or resource in that is Nave's Topical Bible for that reason. Well, theological is very similar to that in that it takes theological themes and traces them in the Bible or throughout the Bible. And so you might take something like Christology. Christology is taking a study of Christ. And what did it mean in the Old Testament? What did it mean in the New Testament? So you take that idea of Christology, but instead of stopping at just where it ends in the Bible, a theological study is going to say, okay, now how has this doctrine been used or viewed throughout the history of the church? How has it, and we might use this word, evolved throughout the history of the church? Because invariably, when you take something like Christology, which is the study of Christ, or angelology, guess what that's a study of? Angels, right? Angelology. We have these technical terms. You'll probably get this one. Soteriology, right? Everyone, that's at the tip of everyone's tongue, right? Soteriology. Soteria in the Greek is the salvation or being saved. And so soteriology is the study of how we would be saved. And we talk about, we get into that when we're doing personal evangelism, right? We want to tell someone what they must do in order to be saved because of the question the Philippian jailer had. Or we might talk about demonology, the study of demons, and who are they? What do they do? Are they still alive? Are they real today? What about demon possession? All of that's going to fit under that purview. Or eschatology, the eschaton, the last things. And so eschatology is the study of the last things. What's going to happen at the end of the world? What's going to happen when the trumpet sounds and the dead shall arise? What happens in eternity when we step into eternity? Or ecclesiology is a study of the church. Ecclesia. Ecclesiology is the study of the church. And so you have these very broad theological themes, and we can look and see what the Bible says, and that's where we begin that study. But we have to understand that we can trace that then through history. What was happening to ecclesiology as a doctrine, as an understanding of the church in the 2nd century, and in the 3rd century, and the 4th century, and the 5th century? What was major happening in the 16th century and the 17th century? Well, we refer to that as the Reformation period. So why was that period important, or is it important to us? And where a topical study would stop at the covers, theological study begins to trace those contours of a particular theological idea through history. And why is that important? You say, well, we just take the Bible and the Bible only. And we do, absolutely. But when you run into someone who maybe their view of the church is not the same as your view of the church, right? Why not? Reading the same Bible, but the problem is it's after the cover, things happened and things changed. And what they accept and what they see as those contours throughout history are different than what we might see as the contours through history. And so understanding where things divert, where they change, where they depart from one another, gives us a better understanding when we're talking with someone, a greater respect for where they are. That a lot of people that embrace, we might say, denominationalism today, it's not that they just woke up one day and said, you know what the Bible says, I just don't agree with that, I'm going to do it this way. I know this is what the Bible says, but I'm going to do it this way. Rather, they have grown up with someone who is giving them their understanding of the same scriptures we would use, and that understanding is different than the way we would understand it. But we have to understand there is reasons for them coming to that conclusion. The other reason why theological studies are good is because we didn't just wake up one day and say, let's take the Bible and the Bible only. Mom and Daddy brought me to Bible class, and I was taught that at Bible class, and I was taught that from the sermons. And I grew up with that understanding in the church. And we can be beholden to some of the same biases that someone else is. And we might look at them and say, oh, no, this is the way it reads in the Bible. And then find out that, well, maybe that's not the way that it reads. And so we have to understand some contours of history. But it begins with first understanding the biblical meaning of some of these doctrines. And I think a good tool, if you're going to go into a theological study, is having some sort of a good theological or systematic theology book. That's what we normally refer to those as a systematic theology. And there's a lot of them that are out there. There are those that are written from a Reformation point of view, a Reformed view. There are those that are written from a Catholic point of view. There are those that are written from an evangelical point of view or a Protestant point of view. And there's even some in, from the history of churches of Christ, Alexander Campbell's Christian Doctrine, for example, or help me out, David. Turner, that's the one I was thinking of, Turner. Rex Turner's systematic theology book is another one. Did you mention one? Lipscomb. Okay, so there's several in the history of the church, and there's some more recent. Jack Cottrell, he is of we might say a Campbell Stone Restoration heritage, tends more to be connected with the and he passed away, I think, earlier this year, if I'm remembering the right guy, from the Christian church. But his is a great book. The Faith Once for All Delivered is very, very good. So what they do is they start with, who is God? And who is Christ? Who is the Spirit? Who is man? What's man's problem? Sin. The study of sin, hamartiology, if you like the ology words, hamartiology, the study of God, theology proper, or we might talk about God the Father, paterology. We're talking about the Spirit, pneumatology. As you talk about all of these different themes, and what they're getting down to is, let's take the accumulation of the Bible's knowledge, and then let's look and see how those doctrines have evolved through history so that we might have a better understanding about, or first of all, about what we believe, and also what others. So that's what I like it because it's exhaustive. If we're talking about advantages of this, it's exhaustive study of a single subject, everything the Bible has to say there. I like that it does attempt to go beyond the topical studies to consider how the doctrine was viewed throughout history. I also like that it allows us to trace those doctrines and how they may have changed and why they changed. There's a good book by a guy named Roger Olson. Roger was one of the professors at Baylor University in Waco. Obviously, Baylor has a Baptist background, but he has a book called The Story of Christian Theology. And it's very good. It's very thick. It's one of those big, thick books that you don't curl up with it by the fireplace, Dwayne. This is one of those that you kind of use it as a reference. But I did get to read it several years ago, and it's very good. And he talks about, in the 2nd century and the 3rd century, they were trying to understand who was Christ. Today, we use language like he was God and man, 100% God, 100% man. But some of the language we use today to describe who Christ is not it's not lifted out of the pages of Scriptures. It's from a honing of the language in that 2nd century and 3rd century. And we use a lot of, this idea that he was completely God and completely man. Not everyone believed that in the 3rd century. They were debating that. And so was he God? Was he man? They talked about, was he of the old words were, was he homoousios or heterousios or homoiousios? And those are big, long Greek words. Homoousios is, we get our word essence. You can almost hear essence in ousios. Essence, he was of the same essence as the Father, homoousios. He was of a similar essence to the Father, but not the same, homoiousios. Or was he completely different essence, heterousios? Different. That's what they were debating in the 2nd and 3rd century. We go back and we read the Bible and we see that he is God. And we say that, he's God. Everything that was God about God, Jesus had. He was everything. And then he did not consider that equality with God something to be grasped or handled or held on to. But what did he do? He emptied himself, Philippians chapter 2, and took on the form of a servant. And so this essence of the Father he held, but the equality with the Father he let go of. Sometimes that's difficult for us to understand, but that was not a given in the 2nd and 3rd century as we would explain it today. And so we're appreciative for those men and women who were writing at that time to help refine the language to better understand the nature and deity of Christ or any of these other doctrines. Some of the disadvantages is that we can get rolled up into a bias of or ecclesiastical history. That's just the way we've always heard it. That's the way we were taught it or something like. We can get rolled up into that. Often it's used to justify current practices or beliefs. And this is possible. We've seen it in ourselves. If we've done much study on our own, we've seen it in other people too, but especially in ourselves, is that we come to the text knowing what I already believe. And so we read the text according to my understanding. This is how I understand it. I'm going to read it this way. Yep, I'm right. I was right all along, or something like that. So there's a danger of what we might call decontextualizing. And I think anytime you're doing topical studies, there's a danger of that, to take a verse that's about Jericho, if we were talking about Jericho, and remove it from its context. Or if we're talking about blindness and we remove it from its context. And so to decontextualize is to kind of cherry pick some verses that go to our study, but we don't really read them always in context. And so that's a danger. And so this is the idea of the theological study. I find it very helpful. I enjoy theological studies. You may have picked up on that a little bit. I like to read the history of a doctrine and how it has fared through the history of man's interpretation and usage of it. But at the same time, there are some limitations and drawbacks to that. Another one is the idea of devotional study. Devotional study. So devotion obviously is about our commitment and appreciation towards God, how we live toward God. That's our devotion to Him. And so devotional studies by nature are they're done in order to, we might say, produce better Christians, to draw us closer to God, right? James would say, draw near to God and He'll what? Draw near to you. That's right. Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. If we flip that, if we resist God, He'll flee from us. But if we draw near to the devil will draw near to us too. So we definitely want to draw nearer to God. That is, we want to increase our devotion. And we use different phrases. We'll talk about a personal relationship with God. We'll talk about a deepened understanding. We'll talk about a enlightened walk with God. All of these are talking about the same thing. It's about our devotion and commitment to Him. And so devotional studies generally use a devotional book to guide the study. Usually that book is going to be geared toward making better Christians. So one particular devotional book that was real popular back in the 80s, My Utmost for the Highest. You've probably heard of Oswald Chambers' book. And that's a devotional book. Some more modern ones, you may have seen the Jenkins Institute. You may be familiar with Jeff and Dale Jenkins and the books that they've been producing, like One Word, Meeting God's People. This last one, I don't remember the name of the most recent one they put out. But about once a year they put these out, and they're 52 studies because there's 52 weeks in a year. And so this is the devotional book. And so like in the One Word, each week was a single word, and there would be 5 devotions about that word. So take faith. And so there were 5 articles that were written about faith, 1 page each. And, so you've got a Monday study, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you happen to miss one, you've got Saturday and Sunday to make up for, and then you go to the next week. And so, faith, salvation, God, man, the one-word studies. Meeting God's People was patterned the same way. It took 52 people in the Bible and then did 5 devotions about that person, and then the next person 5 devotions about them, and the next person 5 devotions. So very, very good books, very good idea, and the idea is that you would have a devotional book. So there's some good advantages to devotional studies. One of them is that it does put a primary purpose on life modification, right? Sin is because we have chosen poorly, right? We've acted contrary to the will of God. But what we're talking about when it comes to being a Christian is, when I'm saved, when God has given me His grace, I want to change my life to be more in line with what God wants, right? And that takes behavior modification. We understand this as parents when our children are acting poorly and making bad decisions. We want behavior modifications. And that's what we're trying to do with devotion, is that we're making behavior modifications, life modifications, so we're closer to God. It also, I think another advantage is that it draws students into a deeper relationship with God when our devotion is good. But there are some disadvantages. If this were the only kind of Bible study that we were doing, books often follow an agenda of the writer. That is, and they betray a personal bias that may not be biblical. It just may not be. As a preacher, I can confess to you, I don't know if any other preachers have told you this, but sometimes as preachers, when we're trying to put together lessons, we get this idea that all of these points in this lesson are going to fit right here. And we get the first, second, and fourth verses fit really, our points fit really nicely, but that third point, doesn't really fit real well. So we massage it a little bit, and we change the word a little bit so it'll fit into the paradigm of the lesson that we're trying to present. Devotional studies are kind of the same way, only on a bigger scale. The guy that's writing or the girl that's writing the devotional book has a paradigm, and they're going to push everything according to that paradigm in order to get whatever lessons or however many lessons they're trying to do, and they push it all in there, they cram it in. And sometimes they've got to massage it a little bit. There's a book that I love, written by Tommy Nelson, and it's called Love, Sex, and Romance, a study of the book of Solomon, Song of Solomon. And it's probably written in the early 90s or so, and he goes through the Song of Solomon. And he does, I think, a fantastic job on going through the Song of Solomon. However, some of the lessons, some of the chapters as he's going through Song of Solomon don't quite fit into the paradigm. And he kind of, massages them a little bit, and maybe uses a rubber mallet or maybe a sledgehammer to get them to fit in just right. And I don't think some of his conclusions are necessarily biblical. I think he's more beholden to his paradigm than he is to the text. And that happens to us all. I mean, to most preachers that I know. If you've ever sat in a lesson and heard someone preaching, and they get to that third or fourth point, and it just doesn't seem to fit, I'm telling you, that's what happened. They had a paradigm at the beginning of the sermon, and they're trying to get all the points to fit under that paradigm, and sometimes they don't all fit. I remember when I was a younger preacher, I'm still young, but when I was younger than I am now, it was, I was one of those preachers that wanted to alliterate all of my points. I don't know, Dave, if you ever did that, but I used to do that. This lesson, they're all S's, or they're all L's, or they're all P's, or whatever. And I can remember asking Julie, does it make sense to use this word to make that point? Well, see, no, it really didn't, but it was the letter P, and it fit with all my other points. And I couldn't think of a better P word to fit in there, right? So I've abandoned that whole idea that I've got to alliterate my points now. I'm lucky if I have more than one point, but that's, I think that's just maturity and age, and realizing, that the cue pattern's not necessarily that important. But I know preachers, they still do that. And I look at some of their P words or some of their S words or whatever, and some of them just don't fit the context. And so devotional books can often follow the agenda of the writer and betray that personal bias. Another disadvantage is that students maybe put more stock in that person's interpretation than in the actual reading of scriptures. And that's especially in devotional books where you've got 4 pages of written material there, and he's quoted 3 verses. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that when you've got 3 pages and 3 verses, it's very easy to put some things in those 3 pages that really weren't in those 3 verses. And so if all we're reading is the devotional material, we may not get that. Often devotional studies are also, I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're shallow. They don't result in the actual transformation or the renewal of the mind. They're just highlights. When I was working with the church in Corsicana, I used to volunteer at the pregnancy center there in town. And they had me teaching Bible classes on a Monday night to these mothers and that were using, they were coming there for material support and counseling and things like that because they had what we would call an at-risk pregnancy. We don't call them that anymore, but that's what they called them at the time. And if these girls would come in and even if some of them had already had their babies, some of them were pregnant, and they wanted me teaching from this devotional book. And so I would teach the devotional book, and there was no time to go into a lot of the verses. It was just take what I've said about these verses and run with it. Now, if you did that, then you would probably draw closer to God, but not always. And so that would be one of the drawbacks of devotionals. Now, last one in this whole series. I would simply refer to this as an expository study method. This is what most of us are most used to. It's fundamental to us. We would simply refer to it as pure Bible study. Study where one selects a passage and then reading it multiple times and wrestling with it, and then using some sort of deductive process, maybe starting with an overarching theme. You read it several times. What's the theme of this paragraph, or what's the theme of this chapter? What's the theme of this particular passage? Maybe it's not a whole paragraph. Maybe it's 3 verses. What's the theme here? What is he trying to say, or what is God saying through this author or this event? And then we move from this large picture, and we start to drill down, and all the way to the point of a verse or a sentence or a phrase or a word. And we might do word studies on some of the important words in a particular passage. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to dissect those words and get their understanding in the syntax of this sentence and what that sentence means to the overarching theme, and understand it that way. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the historical critical method. And that's what it is. We're simply going back, and we're asking questions. Maybe after you have a grasp of what it says, you use that large theme to specific words. What's the theme of the paragraph? How does it fit in the immediate context? Maybe you're looking at Jesus' Matthew 16, where Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" Okay, well, that's a great paragraph, a great passage, isn't it? Some say you're the John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. And he says, "But who do you say I am?" "Well, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And you're Peter. Upon this rock I will build my church." Right? Wonderful passage. Well, we're asking the question, what's the overarching theme there? What is Jesus appealing, or even asking the question for? And where does it lead? What's the lesson? We might ask, who's the audience? Who when he turned and he said, and "Blessed are you, Simon, the son of John, for flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, but my Father who is in heaven." Who's the audience? Well, it's Peter. Who's the secondary audience? Well, it'd be the other disciples that are there with him on the road to Mount Hermon. Who's the tertiary audience? Well, we are. We're the tertiary audience. Or we might say the tertiary audience was Matthew's audience when he originally wrote the book. Why did Matthew write this way? Why is Mark's a little bit different? And did one of them not have all the information? Well, we've talked about this before. The shape of a book is based upon what that writer's purpose was. The writer had a purpose. Matthew had a purpose. Mark had a purpose. And I don't think Matthew was writing saying, "Okay, Luke and Mark are going to come fill in my gaps." Matthew wrote a book that he thought would accomplish his purpose. And the accounts that he chose, and the details and the facts that he chose about each account, was so that he could get to his purpose. And Mark had a purpose. And Mark wasn't saying, "I know my book's short, but Matthew and Luke are going to come in and they're going to fill in the gaps, and then you'll read John and you'll see the rest of the picture." No, Mark was writing to an audience of people so that they may believe. They could read everything in his gospel and believe, have everything that they needed. We love harmonies of the gospel, but even more than the harmony of the gospel, I love reading a gospel. Why did Mark write it that way? What is he trying to get to? See, those are the questions we're looking at with this type of exegetical or expository method. So we go through the verses and the words. We draw lessons. We write them down, and then we apply those lessons. What am I supposed to learn about? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And you're Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And so we're going to learn something about ecclesiology there, right? Because he mentioned specifically the church. We should learn at least something about the foundation of the church in that lesson, right? We should learn something about the nature of Christ, the Son of the living God. That is a rich passage, and if we go through each one of those phrases and those words, we're going to come out with some great lessons. But the idea, okay, so he is the Son of the living God. What does that mean for me? Well, it means that number one, I'm going to put Christ on this very high pedestal, right? He's a man, but he's more than a man. And so I'm putting him on this pedestal. I see something about the value of the church in the eye of Christ. I'm building my church on this confession. I'm building my church on that. And if that's how Christ feels about his church, how should I feel about his church? See? That's where we start to apply those lessons that we're learning. So great advantages here. It allows the text to take the lead, and I love that. I do like devotional books. I like theological books, but I like the text to take the lead. Show me where to go. It forces time with the text. We're interested in daily Bible readings, right? Daily Bible readings. So we're deep in the letters of Paul's. If you've been reading from the beginning of the year, Genesis through Revelation, you should be somewhere deep in the letters of Paul right now. And so that's great. We're spending time with the text. But when you're doing a true exegetical study, 15 minutes reading 2 or 3 chapters out of Ephesians is not going to cut it. We're talking spending an hour reading 12 verses and reading them again and reading them again. I'll never forget being in preaching school, and that's what they said. They told one of my instructors said, don't even begin to write notes or read anything else until you've read the text at least 10 times. Right? Don't mark anything. Don't write anything. Read the text at least 10 times. Well, if you're doing 3 chapters, that takes a long time. That's why I'm usually preaching, out of maybe 10 verses. It takes a long time. You read that 10 times, and then you start to make your notes. You start to draw parallels. I've read that passage on Romans chapter 5 quite a bit, and Julie told me this afternoon, she said, that's not your normal lesson from Romans chapter 5. No, normally I like to go through those first 11 verses, but here's the chapter verses 12 through 21, and this time when I was reading it, something that jumped out to me that I know I've read it before, but it just seemed to jump out and take hold was the reign of death and the reign of life. This reign, and it's the word for kingdom. Christ is king. He's the king of life. Well, who's the king of death then? Well, that's the devil. We see that in other passages, the power of death. But that's what we do. So we spend time and we read them, and they force us to struggle and to wrestle and to toil and labor. When we read over and over, it breeds a familiarity with the passage, right? Those of you who've taught Bible classes, whether it's for kids or for adults, when you've gone over those passages over and over and over and over again, even if it's just week of, let's see, we were doing Zacchaeus, is that right? Zacchaeus this morning in the children's Bible class. And for those of you who taught that lesson, you watch if during this week, how many times something comes up that reminds you of Zacchaeus' passage in Luke 18. It's just there. It's everywhere because I'm familiar with it, especially since I've studied it in order to teach this Bible class. And now I'm going to be at the grocery store and I'm going to see something that reminds me. Or I'm going to be driving down the street and I'm going to see something and it reminds me. That's how it happens. When you've read and become so familiar with that passage, you're going to see it everywhere. It's like when you buy a red car, and all of a sudden you start seeing all the other red cars on the road, And then you sell that red car and you get a white car. And you know what you notice? A bunch of white cars on the road. And you've spent time in Luke 18, you're reading about Zacchaeus, and you start to see references to Zacchaeus everywhere. And that's what Bible study does for us, is it opens our eyes to God in the world around us. Now, disadvantages of exegetical or expository study. I had to get a little creative to fit this into my paradigm to have advantages and disadvantages. I don't see a lot of disadvantages in this type of Bible study. I will say it takes a lot of time and effort and energy. And sometimes we don't have the time right now to do that kind of study. Or, we've come home from a hard day's of work and we don't really have the energy to put into that kind of study. And so it does demand a lot of us. And sometimes we don't have that to give right now. But don't let that stop you from getting to that point where you have the time to give. There is a temptation in this kind of study, but I think in a lot of kinds, to shortcut the process because I already know what it says. I already believe this. I've read this a bunch of times. I know what it says. And so we shortcut the process and we just read it again to reiterate what we already believe. Now, all Scripture is inspired of God and is profitable for what? Teaching or doctrine? Reproof. What's reproof? Correction. Well, correction's the next one, but what's reproof? What's the word made up of? R-E, a prefix, which means what? Again. And prove, what? Prove it again. Prove it again. The Word of God is profitable for proving again what we already believe. And when it doesn't line up what we already believe or what we just read, what do? Correction. Right? Instruction in righteousness. That the man of God may be complete. Well, what if I'm only reading with what I've always read? And I'm reading what I always believe. And I'm reading to prove that I'm right. Then we've skipped that reproof process. And we're really not as complete as we could have been. Or as we think we are. So, don't shortcut that process. Don't say, well, because I don't have time, I already know what it says. There's good reasons to do this exegetical process. And it may be difficult to find some answers to those questions, which just means it takes a little more effort, a little more time, a little more energy. And that's what it comes down to, is the time, effort, and energy. It takes a lot. Now, someone asked me the other day, what's the difference between exegetical and expository? Expository, the root word for expository is what? Expose. It's to expose, to open it up, right? And exegetical literally is to draw out. Okay, so we're going to glean out of. And so we're gleaning out, we're going to expose. And so how I normally explain this is exegetical is the process of the study. Expository is the relation of that study, how you relate that study to other people. You expose. So I've done the work to exegete or to draw out its meaning, and now I'm going to share that, whether you're talking about teaching or preaching, or even if it's just one-on-one Bible studies, you're going to expose what those verses mean or what that passage means. So that's the process of telling it. The other is the process of gleaning it. So that's their relationship. Although I will say that in most circles, expository and exegetical are used mostly interchangeably or synonymously. All right. Any questions or comments? I will not be here next week. I have a family member who's getting married, and they've asked me to do the wedding ceremony. It's going to be in Oklahoma City on Saturday night, and so Julie and I will be in Oklahoma City on Sunday, be coming back probably Monday morning is I think our plan right now. So we'll be coming back then, and we'll not be here for this class. So, yes, Dee Dee. So when you're talking about methods of preaching, textual is generally a method, what we would say a method of preaching or presenting. And textual is very similar to expository. However, the way I normally describe it as textual is to take a particular text, a passage, and instead of going through that whole passage word for word and exposing that, you use that as a springboard to something else. And I'll be honest, that's kind of what I did today, this morning. So I have
Matthew or Romans 5 verses 12 through 21. I did go somewhat through the text, but as expository. But to me, it was more textual because I used those two men, Adam and Christ, to show the power of one life that brought condemnation to the world, one life that brought life to the world, and then looked at other one life events that impacted the world in great ways, and then talked about what's the power of your one life. Well, if you're reading Romans chapter 5, you don't really see anything in there about the power of my individual one life. But what I do see in there is this principle that one life can impact the world. And for that, that's the textual part that I jumped off, used as a springboard to talk about what's the power of your one life. Does that make sense? No? Okay. So the expository is going to dwell more on word for word, how they associate with one another, and drawing a simple lesson from, or an idea, a theme from each of those. And the textual starts with a verse that might give a general principle, and then we're going to apply that in multiple different ways that aren't really in the text, but we're drawing on that message from the text to apply these ways. I don't know. Is that, David? How would you explain that? You did it. I think textual is a valid, and normally we use that more in the realm of the presentation of a study as opposed to our own private studies, because technically, except for maybe the devotional, we're spending time in the text, and so all of our study of the text would be textual in that sense. But we use textual usually in reference to the presentation of it. So if you're teaching it or preaching it, a textual style would start with the text and use that as a springboard for, kind of a secondary or tertiary type lessons off of it. Anything else? All right, so give me word tonight as you're walking out, an idea that I've got for, I guess, the week I come back, which will be the week right before Christmas. This may not be the best lesson, but one I was thinking about was how to choose a Bible. Had some blog posts on this recently that you may have seen, but how to choose a Bible. What makes for a good Bible? And it's not necessarily what you think, because you hear that and you think, what translation are you going to use? Well, we'll talk a little translation, not big, but I'm going to talk about what makes for a good constructed Bible, one that's going to last you for 10 or 12 or 20 years. What to look for. Is it a study Bible, not a study Bible? Is it, what's the cover made of? What kind of pages are there? What kind of ink is used on the page? Think the construction of the Bible. How durable is it? If I throw it up on my dashboard and it rides there all week, and I pull it back and look at it a couple of times during the week, and then I bring it in on Sunday and I throw it back on the dashboard on Sunday evening, and it rides there and it gets dusty and sun drenched and all this. What kind of Bible is going to last under that kind of care? Or do I even want a Bible that's going to last? I was talking to Larry Sullivan, and he uses these he said about a $15 Bible, and he uses it and wears it out in about 2 or 3 years and tosses it and gets him another one, and uses it, wears it out and tosses it and gets so that or I like to get a Bible and I want it to last me for 20. I'm using an ESV first edition, which means it was printed in 2003. It's the same Bible that I use in my own personal studies. And I've got a few signatures are starting to get loose, and some that are starting to pull out a little bit. And the cover is, well, I don't want to give away the whole lesson, but if that's interesting to you, and we'll talk a little bit about what kind of pens and highlighters to use in a Bible, so that you don't ruin it. That type deal. So if you're not interested in that all, tell me. Saying that would be the dumbest lesson, most useless lesson I ever heard. But if you're thinking about getting a graduation gift for someone next spring and you want it to be a nice Bible, let's talk about what makes a nice Bible, Randy.
That's interesting about the pens to use.
Yeah.
Because I had Bibles that were marked up for using certain
Yeah.
several different times. And over the years, some of those inks have disappeared. I mean, they just vanish.
Yep. I've got highlighters that are doing the same thing, and so Absolutely. So anyway, I appreciate your attention. I guess Larry or Luke, one of them, is going to be teaching next Sunday night. But Larry and James Sumners are doing the lesson Sunday morning. They're going to talk a little bit about the mission work in Zambia and things like that. So definitely want to be here Sunday morning for that. Look forward to hearing that, listening to that later. But anyway, appreciate your attention. Y'all can go. I'm done.